Welcome to the channel Darkness in the Night. Before we begin, I would like to note that the entire story you are about to hear is completely fictional. Any similarities to real people, names, or locations are purely coincidental. Now please turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and join me as we step into the deep forests of the Central Highlands. I still remember vividly the chilling sensation when my motorbike wheels rolled over the final slope leading into that Hmong village, a place that the maps seemed to have forgotten in the vast wilderness of GLI. Pleiku faded behind us, leaving only the thick scent of pine resin mixed with the damp, decaying smell of forest soil after a sudden tropical rain. Lan rode behind me, clutching the camera bag tightly to her chest, while Tuan and Hung were strangely silent. We had come here because of a bizarre invitation concerning a cult that worshipped the mother of the forest, a belief that people said had vanished long ago. Ba's house appeared through the mist like a ghostly silhouette. It didn't look like a place where anyone lived. Instead, it resembled a massive shrine surrounded by twisted ancient trees. Wooden statues stood around the yard with pale white eyes. They seemed to follow every step I took, their unfinished carved mouths twisted into crooked smiles, as if waiting for something terrible that had yet to happen. As I stepped onto the rotting wooden stairs of the stilt house, the smell of incense mixed with the foul odor of wild animals rushed straight into my nose, making my stomach churn. Ba sat there in the flickering shadows of an oil lamp. Her hair was tied high, and her dark indigo clothes looked almost black, like dried blood. "Hello ma'am, we're a group of reporters from Saigon," I said, trying to break the suffocating silence. My voice trembled slightly in the strange cold of the room. "The mother already knew you would come. The forest told me the moment you crossed the headwater stream," Ba said. She didn't look at me. Her cloudy eyes stared into a dark corner of the house, her voice low and hollow like wind whispering through leaves. The next morning, Ba led us deep into the heart of the forest, a place where sunlight could no longer reach the ground. The deeper we walked, the quieter everything became, until even the sound of my own breathing felt unnaturally loud. In a clearing, a massive ancient tree emerged before us. Its enormous roots stretched outward like the tentacles of some ancient monster, wrapped tightly around torn strips of red cloth hanging from the branches. Ba knelt down and repeatedly bowed her head against the rough bark, murmuring prayers in a language I had never encountered in any anthropological document. Suddenly, the cicadas fell silent. In their place came a strange whispering from the towering canopy above, as if thousands of unseen spirits were murmuring among themselves about the presence of strangers. "Could you tell us about the Chosen One?" Lan asked while adjusting the camera angle, curiosity flickering in her eyes along with a hint of fear. "It is an honor, but it is also a sentence. My son has gone, my mother has passed, now there is only me and this old forest," Ba said quietly as she stood up, brushing the dust from her clothes. Her face carried the heavy resignation of someone who had already accepted fate. The arrival of Lin, Ba's granddaughter returning from Dalat, made the already heavy atmosphere even more tense. Lin carried the skepticism of a modern city girl. She laughed at the wooden statues and insisted that Ba was inventing stories to frighten us. But by the third night, that skepticism turned into pure terror. I woke up to the scratching sound coming from the bamboo wall of the room next door. When I pushed the door open, I saw Lin sitting on the floor. Her thin hands were frantically clawing at her own legs until blood poured down her skin. The wounds were not made by human fingernails. They were deep and long, as if some invisible beast were tearing into her flesh with sharp claws. The metallic smell of fresh blood filled the narrow room, mixing with the incense that Ba had just lit in the outer hall. "Lin, wake up, what are you doing?" I rushed forward and grabbed her hands. my palms drenched with sweat and trembling uncontrollably. The forest is inside my head. They're telling me I have to return. I have to return to the mother. Lynn looked up. The black of her eyes had vanished, leaving only a horrifying milky white. Her voice was hoarse, sounding more like the growl of an animal than a human. Ba stepped into the room without the slightest hint of surprise or worry. She stared at Lynn's wounds with a strange, almost fanatical devotion. According to her, these were signs of the mother of the forest, proof that Lynn had been chosen to inherit the bloodline. The ceremony of succession was prepared that very night. The entire village seemed to awaken beneath the flickering firelight. The pounding of gongs and drums echoed through the forest, their rhythm wild and hypnotic, making my heart race uncontrollably. The villagers wore bizarre ceremonial garments. They did not dance in any normal way. Instead, their bodies twisted and convulsed as if they were worms burning in fire. In the center of the circle of flames, Lynn was tied to a wooden stake. Her body trembled violently, and her mouth produced constant hissing sounds like wind forcing its way through a narrow crack. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. I could see it in the eyes of the elders standing nearby. An old blind man sat beside me. His shaking hand clutched the fabric of my pant leg. His breath smelled like centuries of rotting leaves. "Run, young man, they are not worshipping a god," he whispered into my ear. His bony fingers squeezed so tightly that I felt pain shoot through my leg. "They are feeding an anger buried deep beneath the graves." "What do you mean? Isn't the mother of the forest supposed to be their guardian spirit?" I leaned closer to him, trying to hear his words over the increasingly deafening sound of the gongs. "There is no god," the old man said, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. "Only children buried alive beneath that tree as sacrifices. Now they have come back, to collect the blood debt from every family in this cursed lineage." His words hit me like a bucket of cold water. But it was already too late to stop what had begun. Suddenly, Lynn stopped convulsing. She lifted her head and let out a scream that tore through the night. The thick rope binding her snapped apart as if some unimaginable force had exploded from within her body. She lunged toward the sacrificial pig tied nearby. She didn't use a knife. Instead, she tore into the animal's throat with her bare teeth. Pig's blood sprayed across her face, across the villagers who were cheering wildly in a frenzy. Ba stepped forward with a wooden bowl, catching the hot stream of blood and offering it to Lynn. But Lynn did not drink. She knocked the bowl violently out of Ba's hands. Then she turned toward her with a look of pure cruelty that no human face should ever carry. For a brief moment, I saw something behind Lynn. A massive shadow rising from the forest itself. It looked like a monstrous spirit of the jungle, with hundreds of tiny children's arms reaching and writhing through the air behind her. "No, that's not the mother. What is this? This is not my mother." Ba stumbled backward in horror. Her legs tangled beneath her, and she collapsed onto the ground. "Mother abandoned them. You abandoned them too. Now it's your turn to repay the forest." Lynn spoke in a voice that sounded like dozens of voices layered together. Her hand shot forward and grabbed Ba by the throat. Her fingernails had grown long and sharp like the talons of a hawk, piercing through the fragile skin of the old woman's neck. Blood burst out in long crimson streaks, soaking the roots of the ancient tree behind them. The entire village erupted into absolute chaos. The villagers, who had once seemed so quiet and humble, suddenly turned on one another like starving animals, biting and tearing at flesh. The gongs were smashed apart. Their broken echoes mixed with the screams of people being torn apart, creating a horrific symphony in the middle of the jungle. Lan, Tuan, Hung, and I could only run. We ran blindly into the darkness, leaving behind the flames that were already consuming the village and Lin's high, piercing laughter echoing through the forest. We kept running until our legs bled and our lungs felt like they were about to explode. But it felt as if the forest itself was moving. The trees seemed to shift, closing in around us. Land suddenly tripped over the stones of a dry streambed. The camera smashed against the rocks with a sharp crack. When I turned back to help her up, I saw something that froze my blood. Small, pale hands. Children's hands. They emerged from beneath the layers of rotting leaves and dragged her violently into the darkness below. "Min, help me, something is pulling my legs." Lan screamed once before disappearing completely. Only the camera remained, its red recording light still blinking beneath the cold stream water. I didn't dare look back. I didn't dare stop running. Even as I heard the desperate shouts of Tuan and Hung somewhere behind me. The next morning, when the weak sunlight finally filtered through the canopy, I realized I was lying inside a damp cave that reeked of death. Hung lay beside me, but he wasn't breathing anymore. His hands were still gripping the dagger that had been driven deep into his own throat. His face looked peaceful, as if he had just completed some sacred ritual. I was the only one who survived to bring this memory card back. But every night, I see strips of red cloth hanging in my bedroom. The whispers of the ancient forest have not released the one who witnessed the truth. And I understand now that the mark of the mother of the forest was carved into my soul, from the very moment Ba placed her hand on my shoulder that first day. Hidden within the memory card I carried, there is a short clip I have never dared to show anyone. In the footage, a figure who looks exactly like me is kneeling beneath the ancient tree that night, with pale white eyes staring directly into the camera and smiling. I staggered to my feet inside the freezing cave. The smell of blood from Hung's body mixed with the scent of damp moss, creating a nauseating stench that made my stomach churn. I had no idea how long I had been unconscious. All I knew was that when I looked toward the cave entrance, the dense canopy of the GLI forest still blocked almost all sunlight, turning daytime into a gray, eternal twilight. Hung's death didn't look like a normal suicide. On his wrists and around his neck were sharp, deliberate cuts arranged in the shape of a strange flower. It looked exactly like the pattern embroidered on Ba's indigo robe. I grabbed my backpack, my hands trembling violently as I stepped over the body of my loyal colleague and ran outside. The forest was no longer just a forest. It felt like a living creature, breathing and tightening around me. The tangled vines on the ground seemed to reach for my ankles like thin fingers, like the pale little hands of the children beneath the ancient tree the night before. As I ran, I shouted the names of Tuan and Lan in desperation. My voice echoed against the cliffs, then returned in a distorted, disgusting tone that sounded like the laughter of something dying. "Tuan, Lan, can anyone hear me?" I screamed, my throat burning as if someone had rubbed salt into it. My eyes felt hollow from exhaustion and terror. "Min, over here, help me." Tuan's voice came from a dense patch of bushes behind a massive ancient tree. His voice was broken, trembling with horror. I rushed toward the sound, pushing through thorny branches that tore at my face. But when I reached him, I froze. Tuan was sitting on the ground with his back against the tree trunk. But his legs were gone. In their place, thick tree roots had pierced through his jeans and burrowed deep into his flesh like monstrous parasites. Tuan wasn't crying. He simply looked at me with a vacant smile. His hands were busy peeling strips of skin from his own arm and chewing them as if they were some exquisite delicacy. The smell of rotting flesh mixed with the sharp scent of tree sap. My stomach collapsed. I dropped to my knees, vomiting uncontrollably. "What are you doing, Tuan?" Let me cut those roots off. We have to leave right now. I pulled a small knife from my pocket and started toward him. But I stopped when I saw the roots beneath the soil beginning to crawl toward me. Don't, they're delicious. The mother said this is the reward for those who listen. You hear her too, don't you, men? Tuan looked up at me. The veins on his face bulged violently, and his eyes were empty of anything human. I stepped backward slowly, my palms freezing cold. The roots around Tuan were writhing now, and they looked exactly like tiny pale children's arms. The blind old man had been telling the truth. This was not a god. This was a nest of demons fed by hatred and flesh. I turned and ran for my life, ignoring Tuan's weak cries that slowly twisted into the animalistic growls of some feral beast behind me. After running for a while, I saw Lan's camera lying beside a dry stream bed. The red recording light was still blinking, painfully bright in the darkness. I picked it up, steadied myself, and looked at the tiny screen. In the slow-motion footage, I saw that Lan had not been dragged away by some supernatural force at all, but by dozens of Hmong villagers. They crawled on all fours, their faces twisted and deformed, their fangs growing long and sharp. Leading them was Lin. She was no longer wearing her modern clothes. Instead, she was draped in the bloody hide of a forest bear, the fresh blood still dripping. Her pale white eyes stared straight into the camera as if she knew I would one day watch this footage again. Min, you hide very well, the forest loves playing hide and seek. Lin's voice suddenly echoed right above my head, sharp and cold like metal scraping against stone. I looked up. Lin was perched on a high tree branch, her body twisted in ways that were not human, and every small movement made her bones crack and pop. She leapt down, landing silently like a wild cat. Then she slowly began walking toward me. With every step she took, the grass and plants around her withered and died. I backed away toward the stream, gripping the camera tightly as if it were the only weapon I had left. You're not Lin? The Lin I know would never do something like this, I shouted, my voice nearly swallowed by the violent wind howling through the forest. Lin died the moment she touched that tree. Now only the mother remains. Do you want to see her? She tilted her head and grinned widely, her mouth stretching almost to her ears, revealing blackened teeth that smelled of rot. Lin waved her hand. A powerful gust of wind slammed into me, throwing me into the dry stream bed. My head struck the rocks with a painful crack, and my ears rang violently. In my dazed state, I saw the ground beneath the stream begin to crack open. Small children's hands reached up from between the stones, grabbing onto my clothes and pulling me downward. I struggled desperately, gasping for the last scraps of air left in my lungs. At that exact moment, a rough hand grabbed the collar of my shirt and yanked me back onto the bank. It was the blind old man, the only person who still seemed to retain a fragment of sanity in this living nightmare. He dragged me into a dense thicket and clamped his hand over my mouth when he saw Lin and the strange villagers passing nearby. Quiet, don't breathe too hard. They can smell the living, the old man whispered, his hot, hurried breath brushing against my ear. Sir, my friends, they're all dead. What should I do now? I whispered through tears, my will completely shattered by terror. We must burn that tree. Only fire can destroy the 100-year hatred bound inside it. But to burn it, you must use the blood of the chosen one. The old man handed me a glass bottle filled with a thick, black liquid that looked like tar. He told me it was Ba's blood, secretly collected when Lin killed her. Only the blood of someone who had made a pact with the forest's dark power could break through the mother's protection. I stared at the bottle in my hand, feeling a cold current run through my body. This was no longer a documentary. This had become a fight for my life, and for my soul. I crawled out of the bushes and headed toward the ancient tree where the ritual had taken place the night before. The sky suddenly turned pitch black. Crimson lightning tore across the clouds, as if something even more terrible was about to awaken from beneath the earth. When I reached the clearing, I saw hundreds of villagers kneeling before the massive tree. They were not praying. They were sacrificing pieces of their own flesh to it. Blood streamed down their bodies and flowed along the roots of the tree, which drank every drop greedily. The mother will never let you leave. Min belongs to the forest now. Ba's voice suddenly echoed. But it was not coming from a living body. It was coming from the bark of the ancient tree itself. Slowly, the wrinkled face of Ba began to emerge from the trunk. Her enormous face formed in the wood. Her eyes closed. From the cracks in the bark, blood began to seep out like tears. My hands trembled as I uncorked the bottle of blood and prepared to run forward. But suddenly a freezing hand grabbed my throat from behind. It was Lin. Her fingernails pierced the skin of my neck, drawing thin lines of blood. She leaned close to my face, her breath carrying the stench of decay and death. "You're going to burn our mother, how cruel you are." Lin laughed softly, a sound so disturbing it felt like my heart had stopped beating. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I hurled the bottle of blood toward the roots of the ancient tree. A thunderous explosion erupted. At the same time, the screams of thousands of souls burst from beneath the roots. Flames ignited, but they were not the normal orange or yellow of fire. They burned with a sickly blue color, devouring everything they touched. Lin screamed in agony. Smoke began pouring from her body as pieces of flesh fell away like dry leaves. Seizing that moment, I grabbed the camera and memory card and ran toward the direction of the rising sun, ignoring the forest's furious howls behind me. But the moment I stumbled out of the forest, I looked down at my palm. A scar shaped like a strange flower was slowly appearing. It was exactly the same mark that had been carved into Hung and into Ba. And then a whisper echoed inside my chest. A voice that did not belong to any human being. "You cannot escape, because you have already carried the mother with you." I staggered onto the provincial highway just as night had completely fallen. My body exhausted like a corpse that had crawled out of the grave of the great jungle. The headlights of a night bus swept across me, blinding and alien, like a world I no longer belonged to. I returned to Saigon looking completely shattered, my breath still carrying the lingering smell of blood and the sharp scent of tree sap. I thought that once I touched the noisy chaos of the city, the ghost of the mother of the forest would fade away. I was wrong. The flower-shaped scar on my palm not only refused to heal but began to swell, turning a dark purple-black and releasing the rotten smell of the deep forest at midnight. I locked myself inside my old apartment, the curtains always tightly drawn. I was afraid of the light. I was afraid to see the green trees outside my window calling me back. "Min, open the door. I brought some porridge for you." Lan's voice echoed outside the door, clear and warm, exactly like the first day we set out on our journey. "Lan, you're alive? That's impossible. I saw you get dragged into the stream with my own eyes." I rushed to the door, my hand trembling as it touched the lock. But I stopped when I looked through the peephole. There was no one outside. Only a torn strip of red cloth stuck beneath the door, and the smell of rotting leaves slowly drifting into the hallway. I stepped back and collapsed onto the floor. The camera containing the cursed memory card lay beside the bed. A strange, irresistible urge made me pick it up and connect it to my computer to watch the final footage I had recorded while escaping in a half-delirious state. The screen filled with static and white interference lines before the image slowly came into focus. In the footage, I saw myself standing among the burned remains of the ancient tree. But I was not running away. I was kneeling there, digging frantically through the blood-soaked soil with both hands, searching for something. And when I looked up into the camera lens, my eyes had no black pupils, and my mouth was chewing on a piece of root that looked horrifyingly like a child's arm. "No, this isn't me. This footage has been faked," I screamed, smashing my fists against the keyboard. But the images on the screen continued to play, almost as if they were mocking me. "You ate us, and you enjoyed it. Men." The voices of Tuan and Hung echoed together from the computer speakers, their laughter sounding like dry branches snapping apart. Suddenly, the scar on my palm exploded with pain. Tiny black roots began to pierce through my skin, crawling up my arm and burrowing into my veins.